You know, I think a lot about this because, I mean, personally, I have intense curiosity about it and a lot of grief because I think for most people, when they hear words like God or divinity, it actually touches some religious wound that they have. And they're just not aware of how deep that wound is, or it's still so raw, I think the grief for me, it's like, well, if you emancipated yourself from, work with that wound or the impact of the wound, you will get to experience sacredness in your own version of sacred, not the way you told it should be, not the way you were told that there is either you were indoctrinated into there is this, old white dude sitting in the sky and it's gonna like your version of sacred. But because it's still like you're not emancipated, you haven't, then you don't get to experience any of it, or you get to let just this tiny bit in, and that's sad. That is very sad. And so many people like, and yeah, and I think that's part of what the beauty of these plants are, is that they open us to our own version of spirituality. And some people find it all of a sudden in nature. They want to go hang out with the plants because that's where they feel something that is transpersonal, beyond words. And some people find it in practices. I know people who found it in writing. They find that when they sit and write, all of a sudden they connect with something that is something inside of them emerges that is beyond their ego, beyond themselves. Or all of, I mean, for me, a lot of my trajectory was going through Eastern traditions. So I went through Eastern traditions, went to India and Nepal and all this, and then slowly what I call is I descended into my humanity. I wanted to be a kite. It was fun. It was fun being like kind of like way up in there, the spiritual world. And it was necessary. I learned a lot. But the more I learned, the more I was like, oh no, the work is being embodied. It's embodied spirituality. It's embodied humanity. And all of a sudden, for me, it was like, oh, I can feel God in a moment, in a person, in an interaction with a person. I feel this thing that I'm like, this is the essence. And it's really, I mean, what you're saying about them saying of how hard it is, it's hard. It's hard work. To be, my ayahuasca teacher said, she would say, this work is not about being more spiritual, it's about being more human. And I remember in the beginning, I was like, I don't know about you. This doesn't sound sexy, right? This doesn't sound like fun. I already know what it means to be human. It's usually mostly about suffering. I'm from Israel. Like, it's about wars and death and conflict and beauty and celebration, but it's not. I want more. And the more I was in this practice, I was like, oh, now I get it. To be fully human is to be with your heart wide open, to have your spirit participate all the time, in my mind. And then whatever it is that you find spiritual starts speaking to you. And yes, there's a lot of layers sometimes that we have to continue to work with. So,
Yeah, and I also feel that once again, this is kind of this longing that I spoke to earlier. I think there is that longing to belong to something larger. I think that's like a fundamental part of being human. And once again, we've culturally just lost the container, the context in which that can happen for a lot of people. So I think that's what a lot of folks are seeking with this. And then the other thing that came up for me when you were talking about it was I have a 3-year-old and she lives in this world, like often there's animals that are in the house with us that I don't imagine or I can't connect with, but I mean, I play along and I pretend with her, but like she's just living in that kind of in-between state, like of like reality and her imagination, like they're very blended. And it's actually really like I feel like that could be a whole series around like what it is to watch a child and how that relates to this process in terms of plant medicine and integration and what does that mean. But yeah, they're very much like she's very much between worlds, like, and I just see how that can slowly start to kind of shut down with kids. I guess I'm surrounded by a lot of kids, just having one myself, and a lot of families like that can slowly get shut down. And I guess in some ways that's normal for the Western context. And then I think it's also about like, well, how do we carry that curiosity of how to keep some of that alive? And to know that it's also her path, and you know she's going to have to make her own choices. But kids live in that world, like of there's a unicorn at breakfast this morning, and there's a puppy and a cat and a bear, and there's I'm going to be a monkey right now, and like all of that stuff, this kind of element of play and just like, or even like that presence of getting curious, of that spirituality of like, last night I was at someone else's house who has a toddler as well who's younger, and they were just looking at slugs for like a really long time. And you know, and so I feel like we can learn a lot from kids in terms of that amount of presence and that amount of imagination, and then this desire to like shut down that reality, which I think is once again is a very much a cultural thing, because that's not irrational. I feel like rationality is what rules this culture.